Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Love First Christians Bible study. This week, we're talking about the Gospel of John. It is our first gospel that we're studying together as a group. We're really excited about it. If you happen to catch this live, or even if you catch it after it's already ended, an invite to the Love First Christians is included in the description of this video. We'd love to have you here. We welcome all faiths, all walks of life. You don't have to be one of my Liberty friends or barbecue friends or gamer friends or, even Christian friends. We just want, we love different perspectives. We love different conversations. So if that's something like you want a positive community to just kind of interact with, if you ever have any genuine questions or struggles or prayer requests, just please pop in and let us know. It's a fantastic group that we've got together, full of a bunch of people that are about as different as I can possibly imagine. A lot of different perspectives in there. But if you're ever looking forward to being able to talk with people who have a difference of opinion and do it positively, it's a really good way to go about it. I'm really proud of the group. It is hardly my effort solely. And so I'm just happy that they're there. We got people filtering in. So again, welcome. And this is the Gospel of John. Now, all the Gospels have a little bit of differences. In truth, it's hard to say, I was looking for what makes John unique, because we'll study Matthew, Mark, and Luke eventually anyway. So what makes John unique? John's a little bit more poetic, which is interesting because of all the four writers, he's probably got the least amount of education. He likely wrote the Gospel of John while he was in exile, looking back on his times with Christ. He may have done it simply because of the gaps that were in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because he has several unique stories. Now, obviously, by the time you get to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is a public figure. Anything that you have about like Bethlehem is written in retrospect. So John actually lived through a lot of what people did, only theorized about. And so he put in a lot of unique stories. He has a lot fewer stories that are in the other Gospels. It's just 21 chapters. It almost feels like you get the pre-ministry, and he teases the Sermon on the Mount. I guess he feels the other gospel writers did enough, or the gospel as it's known in that time, because obviously it wasn't canonized till later. But he felt that the story about the gospel was out there well enough. And so he said, you know what? I'm not going to bother telling the whole Sermon on the Mount. You seem to have got it. But he includes some behind-the-scenes stuff as well as some unique perspectives. As with all the gospel writers, even when he shares the same story, he puts a little bit of, I don't want to say his own twist. I don't think anybody's trying to twist anything or put words in Jesus' mouth. But of course, when you're trying to remember what was heard, or you're getting secondhand information or whatever it may be, you're going to have a couple of changes in words, and some of those words kind of make a big difference. I'll start by saying this is what's unique to John, these stories. And again, when I read these, the reason you'll hear them, you'll be like, oh, it makes sense, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke were probably just along for the ride, studying as like journalists would, whereas John is like in the limo, so to speak, with Jesus. So Jesus washing the feet of the apostles at the Last Supper, very famous story, only in John. The changing of the water into wine, this is known as Jesus. It's not his first miracle, but it's known as his first miracle. The reason he reads a lot of minds, predicts a lot of futures prior to this stage. And we welcome to the stage Aaron Goss. How's it going, Aaron?
I made it. I'm doing all right.
Apparently, StreamYard didn't want to be friends with you or something. I don't understand.
Yeah, it was unique.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got it ironed out, because honestly, what would have loomed over my head, I would have missed you, one, but two is I would have been like, does he think I blocked him from this? I would.
No.
I'm still just kind of doing my intro, so your timing is very good. I'm just talking about the parts that are unique to John. So, washing of the feet, the wedding feast where he changes the water into wine, where he cooks. He uses charcoal and cooks fish and bread for the disciples. Love that Jesus was a barbecue man. I love that John includes that. Let's see, reading the thoughts of the woman at the well. That was actually among my notes. That was the one that I had the most notes about. Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. That's only in John. Jesus saving the woman caught in adultery by saying, let the one who among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her, and then Jesus speaking with Nicodemus. Again, there are little variations throughout all of them, but those are the major stories. All the Gospels, and I'm sorry to be controversial, but there's nothing I can do about this. All the Gospels present a different Easter story. They're not clearly something happened with Jesus being about. In fact, there's a lot of non-Christian stories about what happened post the crucifixion. But as far as like with the tomb and everything like that, John's got his own perspective of what happened as well. So take that for what you will. Aaron, I'll start with you. Unlike the rest of the books of the Bible, where I feel it makes sense to go over everything chronologically, you kind of just need to pick your favorite stories with the gospel, because thankfully we're going to get 4 shots to cover the story of Jesus, right? When we study the Gospels. But I just kind of want to go over kind of your favorite parts or anything that stuck with you, and anything from the Gospel of John that stuck with you. Could be something that it had in common with all the other Gospels, or just a favorite story from the life and times of Christ.
Well, I got to say, I haven't had a chance to read it again recently. But that being said, the last time that I was in the place to read the Gospels, I was like, there's a lot of common ground between the Gospels. There's a lot of differences, as you illuminated, but there's a lot of common ground. And the last time that I was doing a Bible study, I was like, well, let's just cover one of the Gospels. Because, covering the same story 4 different times, even with different information, it's a little tedious. So we decided to read John. And I think it might be my first time having ever read John. The last time that I read it, because I always had the impression that they were almost exactly the same story told 4 times. So I would always read Matthew because it was the first one, and then not read any of the others. And so, it's as you pointed out, there's a lot of stuff in the different Gospels that you don't get from the other ones. So there is value in reading them, all 4 of them. As far as which my favorite part is, of the things that you pointed out, I think the woman caught in adultery, he was without sin. That story resonates with me quite a bit.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start there. Obviously, a big moment. There's no debate.
What chapter is
it? Boy, you're gonna make me do some research. Hey, Patty, how's it going?
Hi.
I tell you what, we are. You just started. We just got finished with the intro, so your timing is very good.
Good, great, thank you.
You're good. We just went over. I don't know if you saw. I posted in the group earlier the parts that are unique to John. So we just went over those just very briefly. We did not get into them. I just mentioned them, and now we're kind of talking about our favorite parts of John. So your timing's very good. We've decided. Aaron has graciously offered up the woman caught in adultery, which is a story unique to John, and I think probably a nice one that you're probably familiar with, flustered or no. Again, Patty, thanks for showing up. I know you have a quick turnaround making it here, so I appreciate you doing that.
For those who are following along in the Bible itself, because I was wanting to follow along as we were talking, it's John 8.
Thank you, Aaron. I was Googling furiously in the background. So.
Yeah. No, I was doing that for you while you were filibustering.
you caught that, did you? I like to think I'm so slick, but apparently I'm not. It's the very first part of John chapter 8. It's very quick. Should I just read the whole thing?
Yeah, it's short.
Jesus went down to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. I'll get into that more on that particular verse in a moment, but Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Aaron, since you offered this one here, what's some takeaways, a takeaway? What's something that you want to talk about with this one?
Okay, so my first thing that I've read this before, like just as an isolated sec. I said I've only read John in entirety like once or twice, but I've read this particular passage a couple of times. I don't recall, and this is the first time I've ever drawn, like my attention's been drawn to it, the writing on the ground with his finger, and the story never tells you what he was writing. It calls attention to it several times, and it doesn't tell you what he's writing. That's
Theologians have lost their minds trying to figure that out. And I got to say, it's one thing when I say there's no consensus, but there is no consensus on this. Like it's all over the place. Somebody in our group said there's a chance he was writing the sins or the names of the people that the people around him have had committed adultery with. Again, it's all theory, but yeah, continue, Aaron.
No, that was my my first takeaway. But then the second takeaway is the idea that explanation would make sense if you talking about the fact that only people were walking away one at a time. Maybe they saw their own crimes listed on the ground, and then they decided to make a hasty departure before they were the next person stoned.
Yeah. It's very possible. Patty, thoughts on this one?
I've heard a whole lot of teachings on this, and one of the better teachings I've heard on this was what Jesus was accusing the men of was rather unique, because it's basically, hey guys, I bet you thought you got me here. So we're going to have a little moment here. If none of you have ever lusted in your hearts, and we're all men here, so we're going to have an honesty, drum circle here. Go ahead and throw that stone. But since we're all men and we know that our bodies take over, for example, first thing in the morning, the one who throws that stone, we're all going to know is lying. So knock yourself out on this one, dudes. I mean, it was really quite a moment, because it was really like a man calling out a man, and no guy can throw that stone. So it was kind of like he got them all. And it was like, and even the religious leaders couldn't throw the stone because they're all men and they all have a certain biology, and he got them all on biology, which I thought was really unique on the story. And then he was just like, "So woman, where are your accusers?" Because it's like, because God said it's in your heart, it's in your head, it's in your body. It doesn't matter. It's all the same to God. And he called them out on it. And that was a unique call out.
Yeah. Boy, I won't. I'm going to hold my story for the in a bit here, because I think this touches on the woman at the well story. There's some overlap here, and I want to get into that. But I will. So for my takeaway from this one, this question is a trap, and people might be like, "Well, why is it a trap?" You just say, "I follow the law and stone her," right? The law also says to forgive them, and here's the thing about the law of Moses, as Jesus has, I believe, by already in the Gospel of John, but certainly on other occasions, has mentioned that the law of Moses is contradictory, that you can't, it's literally impossible to follow the law of Moses. And that's not me making a referendum on it. A lot of people are like, "Whoa, so you admit you have a Bible that contradicts itself?" I think I have people that contradict itself, and they try to interpret the Bible as best as they can. And I do think that sometimes there are different even the same sin can have different punishments as a way to rehabilitate somebody or to fix them. Obviously, if you're stoning somebody to death, it's not much of an effort to fix them. But, so what we have is just a lot of, it's impossible, right? So this is the trap, is to say, oh, but this verse says this. And if Jesus says the other thing, they'll be like, oh, but this verse says this. Right. So this is the trap that they've set for him. He's already established how he feels about the law of Moses. Not that it's entirely wrong, but that it's no one can follow it. It's impossible to follow all the tenets within the law of Moses. I love that Jesus doesn't attempt to justify himself by the law here. This is one of the verses, and I think, Aaron, you probably heard me say this a few times before when we are in some of the discussions that we're in with some of the Christian folks that we happen to come across online. And I'm sure you've heard me say this several times, but Jesus makes no bones about breaking the law of Moses. And it's not that he doesn't care. In fact, he has the spirit of the law of Moses deeply embedded in his heart. But the paper of the law is not the point. Right? Like, what is the spirit of this law? And Jesus, on this occasion, as well as we have earlier when they tell, I think it's in Mark, when they have them wash their hands, or they don't wash their hands, and technically the rule is death if you don't wash your hands before dinner. Remember that, kids. That's a good one. But and that's another time where instead of Jesus saying like, well, let me try to, what about this law? Like, he doesn't try to worm around it. He just says, no, then the law's bad. Right? Like then I'm not following it, new policy. Right. And this is something that if you have the gift of the Holy Spirit, that is extended to you as well. New policy is okay. In fact, that gets into the commandments versus the law. That would be another story for me, and that would be cutting in line. So Patty, I will let you talk about a story that you got from this John, or story, verse, whatever it may be, overall theme, something that you think about John.
Well, no, actually, because mine's totally like nobody ever talks about mine, so I don't want to because mine's actually about the burial with Nicodemus and I forget who. What is it? John of Arimathea? Is that the other guy who's with him?
Yes, Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph, of Arimathea. So I mean, it's like, and no one ever wants to talk about that. So because I just find that just unbelievable, touching. So
talk about it. That's what we're here for.
So okay, so there's Nicodemus, and Nicodemus was like with like the bad guys, right? The Pharisees and the people trying to kill him, and he's kind of like behind the scenes, and and so is Joseph, and like everybody would have thought they were like the bad guys in the story, but like in the end, they were the ones, like all the apostles, everybody deserted Jesus. Like at the end, they were the ones who took him down off the cross and bathed him. And see, this is the thing that makes me cry when I think about this kind of stuff, because it's like he was dead. He couldn't do anything for them. And they were the ones who made sure that he was properly buried according to custom. And they were at that point when he could do nothing for them, they risked everything they were, their social status, everything. They took this body that was blood drenched and sweat drenched and disgusting, and they made sure that it was properly and respectfully taken care of according to Jewish law. And there was nothing he could do for him. And I just think of how much they loved him to do that. And I just think how much people must have looked at them, like the apostles and the followers, and think how horrible they were, because they weren't one of them, I think about like they didn't know behind the scenes everything that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea have been doing, and they were probably edgelording them behind the scenes, like when we take over, we're going to, get rid of them. And what they didn't know was that these guys were true believers, and they were doing things behind the scenes, trying to protect Jesus. And when everything was said and done, the apostles who were going to like be with Jesus till they died scattered. And here are these two men who risked everything so that this dead man could have this proper burial because they loved him so much. They loved him so much. And I just think about like how much they loved him. And I don't think anybody really recognizes that. And everybody ignores that in John. And I love that part about John.
We actually don't get to know the character of Nicodemus outside of John. And
Yeah.
thank God that John just decided to be like, hey, there's a couple things that the other writers missed, so I'm just going to fill in a few blanks here. Because, oh my goodness, the story of Nicodemus is very short. He's only makes 3 appearances in the Gospel of John, and all 3 of them are pretty earth-shattering.
Yeah.
One is him going to Jesus. This is when we get John 3:16, the most famous verse in the entire Bible.
Right?
Like, is spoken to a Pharisee.
Right.
Like, is spoken to like a super bad guy.
And by the way,
it's
the Pharisee, by the way, who takes him off the cross. Right? Everybody forgets. Nobody notices that part. The guy who takes him off the cross and gives him the proper burial and risks his whole social standing to do that. Just everybody. That's who John 3:16 is spoken to. FYI.
Yeah. This is a guy. When you look at the early Christian church and its success, you're like, how can it be successful? Only one of them didn't get murdered, John, and he died in exile.
Yeah.
The rest of them got murdered, but with their murders inspired more sympathy for them than what would have happened had they just left them alone. And this is what it's like to live a godly life, I think, in the modern era, is such that you're so beloved and godly and wonderful that if somebody comes and kills you, they become more sympathetic and want to join your cause all the more. Now, Christ obviously is pretty good at this. We can only be humans, but as such, the apostles all did it well, outside of maybe, Judas, but most of them did a great job, upon their deaths, establishing such trust and love within the communities they were. Sometimes communities they didn't have a language in common with, and they're just like, no, that was a good guy that you just killed. Like, and Nicodemus is the one that's like, man, that was a really good guy. And you're right, like, makes a huge risk. We're told that the Pharisees call off the dogs at one point, and it's funny is this story is in the other Gospels, but John recognizes the guy. Now, nobody else recognizes the guy who calls off the dogs because they're just following Jesus like journalists, right? So for them, one of the Pharisees just goes, hey guys, maybe we should knock it off.
Yeah.
Maybe that guy is Nicodemus,
like,
right?
Yeah.
Like, who's telling his guys to knock it off. Now,
yeah.
Nicodemus,
And by the way, and John points out that the Pharisees attack Nicodemus for it, right? Like he puts up with a lot of crap trying to protect Jesus.
Yeah, and then you have the Gospels. So I love the story of Nicodemus. For me, it's a warning sign to me for me to paint my enemy when I try to paint my enemies with too broad a brush.
Right.
But there's probably a Nicodemus among them. Listen, Nicodemus was not a cool dude throughout now we have some stories that are really cool for us to read, but this is not somebody who was just, oh yeah, I'm one of your apostles now. I'm all changed. Oh, let's fix everything. Like, this guy was certainly more part of the problem than he was part of the solution during the time of Christ. However, like, he was redeemable and does end up becoming redeemed. He is a huge instrument. We actually don't, unfortunately, we get more history than we actually have in the Gospels about this, but is huge in taking the Sanhedrin, I want to say down, but redirecting them into a point that they're just like, yeah, the Christians are good, the good guys, and we screwed up. And you don't get that without the influence of Nicodemus. And we don't get the influence of Nicodemus if we are unwilling to talk to our enemies, even if they're bad dudes. And even because, like, Nicodemus, he goes in the dead of night to Jesus. He's like, I don't want anybody to see me here.
Yeah.
I don't want them to even think I'm on your side, because that's a huge problem for me. And maybe some enemies in your life are doing the Nicodemus thing where they're just like, hey, I think you're a cool dude, like secret, but in public, they're real jerks. They're really against you. If you think you can reach them, do your best. I mean, Jesus could with Nicodemus if they're being genuine, and Nicodemus is genuine. I like that Nicodemus, along with many of the gospel I want to say the apostles are not poetic. They actually, with Jesus at one point, are like, can you please stop talking in figure of speech in the Gospel of John? Like, you are killing us right now. They're like, hey, Jesus, you want something to eat? And he's like, oh, my food is eternal food. And they're like, Jesus, do you want something to eat, dude? Like, I am picking up food right now. Like, I don't know. And so I like that Nicodemus is like, I don't get the born again thing. Like, I don't get it. Now, of course, we live, even if we didn't grow up with the gospel, we live in a society where everybody knows what that means. But of course, being born again is a weird concept unless you grow up with it, knowing what that means, you know? So I like the fact that he's like, I'm just struggling a little bit on this poetry here. And Jesus is like, okay, let me kind of iron that out for you, because I do love speaking of riddles. Aaron, anything about Nicodemus stuff?
No, actually, I knew. I think I was confusing him with the. My name is, if the name is failing me, but the man that climbed up into the tree to listen to the speech.
Zacchaeus, isn't that still my background? That is my background right now.
Yeah.
That is Zacchaeus right there.
Zacchaeus.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. We got Bradley says Nicodemus is one of my favorite characters because he agreed with Jesus that the law was self-contradictory and was a reformer. He didn't have the faith to become an apostle, but I like to think he found it eventually. I believe he absolutely did find it eventually. I think at the point where you're spending your money and burying Jesus and stuff, you've made clear which side you're on.
Yeah.
James says he likes that perspective. I'm going to assume he was talking to all three of us. So thank you, James, for that. All right. So one of my favorites here is the woman at the well. I had a ton of notes about this. This is just, he's talking to a woman. He's like, hey, can I get the water? Of course, she's like, what are you doing talking to me? Like, I'm a Samaritan woman. And she's like, and he's like, yeah, please, can I get some water from you? Or he's like, can I get some water from you? And he's like, you know, if you knew what was going on, you'd actually be asking water for me, because I got like the eternal life. Again, Jesus being a little flowery with his language here, because that's what he likes. What I really like about this passage here, there's a part where she gets called out for the husbands. Now, there's a lot of disagreement over this one as well. And she actually is not getting called out for the husbands. This is a common kind of misreading of this verse, which is oftentimes used to make her sound like a harlot. And that's not what's going on here. Jesus is like, go get your husband. And she's like, well, the guy I'm with isn't my husband. He's like, that's true. You've actually had 5 husbands and none of them have been like your husband. So what's going on with this woman here? Because being divorced 5 times, while that may be somewhat normal if you're a Hollywood star today, is certainly not normal back then. There is a couple of different readings on this. Some believe that, because the thing is it's one thing for Jesus to be flowery, but the flowery stuff is going above everybody's heads. So this is kind of a literal thing. And when he says that, she's like, you know more than you're like, you are up in my head. Like, you know my history, you know my past. So you are like a prophet. You know, I know that because nobody else knows that about me. So a few theories here. One is that she has been divorced 5 times. I find this actually to be perhaps the most likely, because men divorcing women at that time was pretty problematic. Jesus actually goes into this later on, and we get that verse where, again, people misinterpret it, where they think, oh, Jesus doesn't like want us divorced for any reason except for adultery. Jesus is actually providing a slight exception where he's saying, hey, listen, you've got the contract. You're not supposed to break it. And within that contract are many things that you have to fulfill your obligations. A lot of stuff from men to the women. And the men have just been divorcing their women just because they feel like it, right? They feel like it and they feel like moving on. And Jesus like, if she's fulfilling her role of the contract, unless she's cheating on you, you got to stay with her. So Jesus is actually on the side of women like this that have been kicked to the side and just been like, you're just somebody's next upgrade or whatever, you know, you're a stepping stone. And the guy that you're with, he's not the guy, is he? Like, is he the guy that loves you, that cherishes you? Like, you know, you have yet to find your husband. You have yet to find the guy. Another interpretation of this is that she has been extremely unlucky and had all 5 of her husbands die. This is possible. Again, not very likely. Nothing's very likely, but you know, something's happened with this poor woman. but that they have died and she's just trying to do her best to keep it together. The final explanation that I saw, and I should say there's a ton, the third most likely explanation that I saw is that she has been with 5 men in her life. None of them have ended up being of the marrying variety. And the current guy is also not somebody who cares about her enough to get to marry her either. I really felt for this girl because she's going through a lot. She's a Samaritan. She doesn't have a lot of options when it comes to dating. Remember, the Samaritans, while being an Abrahamic religion, do not follow in the tradition of the Jews and all of their customs. You think about how different the world was when Christ lived in it. And he still grew up in the Jewish culture, but how different that was from when we read in Exodus and what that culture was like with Moses and Joshua. Just the vast differences that everything has changed, right? This same change happened between Abraham and where we get with the Samaritans. And the entire difference with the Samaritans is just location of worship, which is really dumb. It's something that Jesus goes in here and he's like, this where you worship isn't going to matter anymore, guys. I'm just letting you know here. But when we see Jesus here, that they are in a culture that is kicking women to the side, more so even than apparently the Jewish tradition. The Samaritans are not very large. This woman does not have a lot of options when it comes to marrying. So there's a chance that she's being married off just because she is a warm body. But we're talking like dozens of Samaritans. Even today, there's only like 900 of them. This is not a huge population. They are not liked, but it is also not a huge population. So this girl finds herself in a very small world, face to face with somebody who is the master and creator of the world. And that Jesus would give her the time of day. I've been talking a lot, so I will end with my favorite part of the story, which is when the apostles come back and they're like, he's talking with a girl. That is weird. Even more than talking with a Samaritan. Like, this is just the world that they live in. And Jesus just cuts through that. Nope, she's a child of God. Yes, I will reveal great truths to her that I'm not even revealing to you guys because she needs it. You know, she needs something to believe in and like an expansion of her world to see something and believe in something. Thoughts you have, Patty, on the woman at the well?
Well, first it never really explains why she's in there. I mean, it never really explains what, like, she's just this random person at the well. I mean, he doesn't perform a miracle with her. He doesn't, she's not really in need. I mean, if you look at the other things like Jesus does, I mean, she's not really spectacular, which makes her interesting. I mean, because when we talk about the woman at the well, she's not being hauled before Jesus because she's had 5 husbands. She's not a leper coming to him asking, for mercy. She's not being lowered down through a bed, through a cutout ceiling. I mean, so it's like, why is she in there, right? I mean, why is she in there? It literally, if you think about it, it makes no sense. I mean, Jesus is just, having a rest while his disciples go down into town to go get him something to eat because he's been working all day, right? I mean, so it's like, really, what is the point of her being in there? And when you think about it, the only point of her being in there is that she's Samaritan, and Samaritans are dogs to Jews, right? I mean, they're not supposed to talk to them. And the second cultural norm that gets broken is she's a woman and he's not supposed to talk to her, but she's not just a woman. She's like apparently the worst of all. I mean, she's been like married 5 times, none of the other women will hang out with her. So she's sort of a social outcast. And so he's chosen her just to kind of sit down and have a conversation with. And it kind of shows that who Jesus thinks is valuable is not who we think is valuable, and we have to pay attention to that, And I think, like, when we think about the woman at the well, it's like that's always what the woman at the well story is about, right? It's about who Jesus thinks is valuable, who God thinks is valuable, is not the people that we think are valuable. So we have to reevaluate the value of people in our lives and the value of people in general. All people are valuable, and we have to stop looking at and judging them based on what we think are valuable.
I love that. Yeah. Jesus was around today, he's not trying to get popularity on social media.
Right.
He's talking to the guy who's getting bullied, not allowed by his parents to use social media. You know.
Right.
Aaron, any thoughts on the woman at the well?
Well, I was just wondering, like, does her story? I'm reading the chapter right now. It's chapter 4, and I'm wondering, does she get her story resolved? Because
No.
from what I was going to say, because she mentions at the beginning, after Jesus says, you know, whoever drinks this water will never be thirsty again, and she says, well, can I have some? You know, and as far as I can tell, her story never gets a resolution. She draws more people to Jesus
Right.
in verse, what is it,
Yeah,
39.
Yeah, she runs down and starts telling everybody, "Oh my gosh, you got to meet this guy. Right? He knows everything about me. He's amazing." Right? Yeah.
But yeah, herself, like, it never actually she doesn't get a resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing is like, and I think almost like the adulterous woman doesn't, I mean, is there really a resolution? What, she just hopefully doesn't sin again, but like, we don't get to know like how things went with her husband. We don't know why, like any of that. And there's just, I think that this is the cosmic mind of God dealing with mortals. Like, it's just like, you can only know, like, they know everything. We know a little, and they're willing to like help us like try to fit in a few pieces, but they can't fit in the whole puzzle for us. You know, they can't paint the whole picture. I think it'd be fascinating to know what the rest of this woman's story was, but the fact that like God took the time to sit down and talk with her, to me, was really I think amazing.
Yeah. And he could have talked to anybody. I mean, this is the interesting thing about the woman of the well, is that think of all the people that Jesus comes in contact with, and he doesn't sit down and have a conversation with any of them, but her she talks to. I mean, he because he knew she was going to be there, and he could have walked down into the village with his apostles, and he could have like sat down and ate with them there and not come back, but he sent them down knowing that she was going to be there. And he hung out and waited for her, right?
Well,
I mean, that's what makes it so interesting.
That's a good point. You say like he knew that she was going to be there. I've always ascribed to the idea that Jesus, as a man, when he was walking the earth, wasn't omniscient, that he was human. And that makes it more interesting to me that things like this happen, because it could be like God's will putting him there in that spot to speak to her. Rather than, because like, what's the point of him being able to read minds, like in this particular instance, if he already knew what the situation was going into it? You know, I don't know if I have any scriptural basis to gauge that that theory of mine, but that's always been my theory.
Well, I have nothing to go with that. He knew he was going to be there, so we're both on the same plane right now. So
Jesus mentions that God knows when the world is going to end, but he doesn't. He does make a few differentiations. Since we're getting into it, I'm just going to talk about one. We get this whole I am the Father and the Father is in me. John expands on this verse. And I don't know if you guys caught this, because this to me was like, I haven't read it in a while, and it blew my mind a little bit. And he was like, and so also you are in me, I am in you, you are in the Father, he is in you. And I was just like, because we use this all the time to kind of talk about the Trinity, right?
Yeah.
Well, if we're using that verse that Jesus the Father and the Father is in him as they're both the same God, then you, dear listener, are also God by the exact same verse and the exact same logic. I don't think that's necessarily a wrong way to look at it. There is a lot about your fellow human beings being God for all intents and purposes. Now, I am not going to worship my neighbor or celebrities or my dog or whatever else, but I do think that there is that God element in all of us, and we are better off treating each other that way than otherwise. That's about, I just find it to be profoundly deep that is mentioned here in John. Any thoughts that you two have about that? No, and that's okay. Bradley says Samaritanism is the last stronghold of the pre-Judaism Israelite faith, and that only made the Zealots hate them more. That is correct. So this is if you look up Samaritanism, you'll find that the essence of the disagreement comes from the location of the binding of Isaac, when Abraham is asked to bind Isaac and sacrifice him. And the Samaritans hold that is one place, the Jews hold that it's in another. Of course, the Jews had their culture wiped out, whereas the Samaritans actually kind of kept the location intact. And so, of course, when somebody has like the OG holy site and you're just kind of trying to do your best to locate yours, that can create some nasty feelings there. For whatever it's worth, I actually think the Samaritans, just historically looking into this, and it's been a while since college, but I remember thinking at the time that they actually had it more accurately placed. And so that can cause some feelings of resentment, obviously, when somebody is maybe more accurate than you. Again, as Jesus said, the location doesn't matter. So why I studied this in college, I probably shouldn't have, but I did, and I thought it was interesting. Okay, I'm going to do reverse order here. So that way, if you guys have another thing you wanted to think of that you read out of John, you can. But I'll stall you for some time by talking about another story through here. Jesus driving out the marketers. Now, this is one of those where you have differentiations in all the Gospels. It's called like you've made my house a den of thieves. And John, he says, you've turned it into a market. Make of it what you will. John is also where we get specifically that Jesus used the whip to drive out the sheep and the cattle. Again, if you see people talk about Jesus whipping people, I'm not saying you have to correct them every time, but if you could just kindly remind them for me that Jesus was using that not as an instrument of war, but as a tool for which to herd cattle, I would appreciate that. I don't like when people try to make Jesus out to be more violent than he is. I do like the way John covers this, because even though I love myself some free markets in a political sense, Jesus is not supposed to be a transaction. We talked last week about forgiveness and about debt and about how being in debt is really not healthy for the debtor to hold over somebody for themselves as well as for the person that they are holding it over. When Jesus tilted these tables and they saw exactly how much money was happening, this absolutely was against the law. And a lot of people don't understand why Jesus didn't get busted. I just looked at our numbers, by the way. Thank you so much for everybody who's joining us. I don't know why I just barely peeked up at the screen, but we just had a big old influx of people. So thanks for joining us for the Gospel of John. But this is something that I just think this is where we just can't be doing transactions. Church is not a transaction thing. If you're in part of a faith group, it's not transactional. This is not join our church and then you'll get access to these benefits. Patty, you were around when we talked about Acts and what they were doing that made them successful. And it wasn't join our church and we'll help you if you need money to stay in your home. It was, we'll give you the money to stay in your home. I hope you'll join us for church sometime.
Yeah.
That order is so vitally important to this world because everybody wants something from you. If you've ever tried to set up like a business, everybody wants something from you. If you're in a family, everybody wants something from you. If you're in a friendship, it feels like everybody wants something from you. And you're just burnt out, right? This world will burn you out, even in healthy relationships. You just feel like it's give and take, but man, that giving is still giving, I'm still giving. And man, when you go to a church, that should be a place where your education is free. Your food is free. Your medical expenses are free. Your housing is free. Whatever you need is free. It's taken care of. And I understand if you're going to get all economic minded, believe me, I am all about economics. I get it that nothing is really free. But the point is that it is given out of love and it is given freely and it is given without expectation of any return if you are doing it in the gospel way. And so the reason there is no repercussion for this verse is because Jesus shows the sheer volume of coins when he tips over those tables and they're embarrassed and they go, everybody knows this is because we make it out to be like, we have no money. We live so meekly. According to their own records, like they wouldn't have had the money to like pay Judas to rat out Jesus. Like they just pretended to live this like meager, like, oh, you need a sheep for sacrifice. That's going to be so pricey. And it wasn't. It just wasn't. They were fleecing these people. And so by exposing it, that's what was important. And the last thing I'll say about Jesus with the Jesus on the temple grounds is that Jesus is taking care of his own business. These people are not the most evil people in existence. Jesus is in a time where Rome is keeping slaves. He is at a time where the Greeks are involved in political warfare, where there are battles, and there are battles in Africa. Over the east, you have India, and you have more mercantilism taking advantage of people there. You have caste systems and people being kept. Jesus could have directed his anger at anybody, but he directed it here. And why? Because that was his people. This is the plank in Christ's eye. Rome is not his business.
Right.
He's not a Roman.
Right.
But he is a Jew, right? He is a Christian. And this was people within his, and so whenever there's Christians that they're just like, oh, do we have to be infighting all the time? I say, yes, we do. I don't control Muslims. I don't control atheists. Right? I'm not part of their in-group. They're on them. I want them to join us, but they're not going to do it until I pull this massive plank out of my eye. Right. So if you're going to be big on exposing stuff instead of getting in gay people's faces, getting in soldiers and veterans' faces, and all these Christians that think I'm so persecuted because of all this blowback that I'm getting. No, that's not it. You show up, you punch up, and you punch within. And this is your own church. Believe me, there is no shortage of problems that the church has right now. I question about the church in that time period. They are obviously evil. I don't know if they hold a candle on the current state of the Christian church, especially here in America. There is plenty of fixing for us to do. So let me go to Aaron then. Aaron, any thoughts about Jesus at the temple? I almost said market, but kind of the same. Jesus at the temple.
Yeah, I wonder about the exchange that he has in verse 20 and 21, where he talks about raising the temple within 3 days, and the temple being a metaphor for his body. And I'm wondering how that fits into, obviously it's metaphorical in the sense that it's talking about his spiritual body. But I wonder, in the diegetic conversation that's taking place in front of the Pharisees, what does that mean to the Pharisees? Do they interpret it as he intends it to be interpreted, or do they think he's just talking nonsense? That was something I was stewing on.
I think doesn't John say later, way later on, to be oh, now they understood what that temple verse meant.
Well, yeah, it says
over their heads, right?
After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus has spoken. So his disciples get it after the fact. Right. But the Pharisees themselves, I'm just curious what their thought process would have been as Jesus was saying it.
Probably that he was a lunatic. That's all I got. Patty, any thoughts you have on this particular passage?
Well, I didn't know as much about the temple until I started talking to you, and then I actually started looking into it and researching it because you got me interested in it. And one of the things that I learned was, when they were at the marketplace, which I didn't know this, and they were like selling, the lambs for slaughter and all that. They were doing this while the ceremonies were going on. So this was very disrespectful. So you could actually hear the bartering while they were making the sacrifices, and I didn't know this. That it was more disrespectful than you can imagine. So imagine being in the having the ceremonies going on, the whatever the ceremonies were, but in the background you can hear them haggling over price. I mean, what could be more disrespectful than that? I mean, this is just, and they let that go on because they were making money off of that. And I can't imagine Jesus walking into that and what he just must have thought. I mean, it must have just been a jaw-dropping moment for him walking in and seeing that the first time. And so I did some research on the whip he fashioned. And so apparently that took some time to fashion. So it wasn't something he fashioned out of anger. Apparently that had to take some time and some skill, and it wasn't something that he just like, when you see it, it looks like he like grabbed something and just like, and apparently that actually took some time and some thought in making it. So he had to know how to make it and stuff. So it wasn't something like he just walked in and suddenly just did it out the spur. He had to think that out and return back to the temple to do it, which I didn't know that either. So this wasn't something that was a rash, spur of the moment activity of his. This was something that he did deliberately and with thought to make a point about what he thought about what they were doing to God's house, which makes it more impactful, actually.
Yeah, the intentionality of it is good. I'm glad you mentioned that first part, that it's actually on temple grounds. So this is, when you read that in the chapter, you're kind of like, Jesus on temple grounds. And you're like, well, sure, at the temple or whatever. Normally, this business was conducted in front of the temple, as unsavory as that is. In particular, this particular temple it was happening inside. And that is, as you said, massively problematic, because it's one thing to be like, hey, if you sinned, come get your sheep on the way in, you'll sacrifice it, you'll leave. It's another thing when you're there to be like, hey, did you lie? Maybe did you steal? Maybe if you had been a bad son, did you lust after somebody? Did you, hammer after it? And then the piece, it's not about your repentance. It's about you buying something. Right?
Buying indulgences.
Right.
Biblical indulgences.
Yeah, did I remind you?
Disrespect is just obnoxious.
Through the roof.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, and that makes the ministry about finance, as opposed to once you're like, at least if they left it out front, still wrong.
Yeah.
But at least if they left it out front, you could at least get, when you're inside, it's serene. It's a place of repentance, of contemplation. No room for contemplation there. Like,
You
go
say
ahead.
that, and I'm curious. It reminds me of this story, and I can't remember where it is. Maybe you can remind me of the. I think it's Jesus that having this conversation with his disciples at some point, of the woman who can't afford to get a proper sacrifice. She sacrifices what she can, and I think she's judged for it by some outsiders, and then Jesus corrects them.
I think I brought it up last week, that the woman who gives like the 3 talents or whatever, and they mock her, and Jesus says something about, hey, she gave all she had. You know?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I thought it was an actual animal sacrifice, but if it's money, then yeah, I could be misremembering.
I could be superimposing a different story on yours. So there's so many.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we're talking about the woman with the 2 mites or coins or whatever we want to say, right? The widow. And I think in relation to this, it's even more impactful, because we're talking about having the money to be forgiven, like in a very real sense, that like, oh, the rich people can afford a sheep, so they can lust and kill a sheep and they're forgiven. Whereas if I look at my neighbor the wrong way, I don't have the money to be forgiven. I just have to give whatever I've got, which of course the Pharisees take in exchange, every last drop of your blood in order for forgiveness. And they say, all right, we'll just call that good enough. And so it's not that Jesus says the big takeaway from this is obviously the woman gave more. Of course, she gave all she had, whereas this guy's giving a fraction of the money that he has, and that money is actually people like the widow's money and not his own. We've gone over that, but also in the sense of like forgiveness, hers went a long way and his went like nowhere. His is being flashy, and of course he can buy as many oxen as he wants to, but the woman couldn't. But Jesus is like, no, hers actually went someplace. Not just financially, but in terms of like her forgiveness as well. I like the diss on Nazareth. Nazareth, can anything good come from there? Made me laugh. That was just really mean, but it's funny that it said it and it made its way into the Bible. Yeah. Oh,
especially because they didn't know he was born in Bethlehem. Because
Right.
wasn't the Savior supposed to come from Bethlehem? It's like, you idiots. He was born in Bethlehem.
Right, he did. He came from both
He's like,
places.
he's like, yeah, but he came from Galilee. He's from Galilee. He
Yeah.
doesn't-
Imagine caring about what exact location you're born in terms of your humanity. Wink. Anyway, I talked about my Bible verse. I'm sorry, I got carried away. Patty, anything else from John that or any story in here that you wanted to talk about?
Well, of course, you can't talk about John without talking about the resurrection, can you?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty biggie out there, I mean, I think.
Yeah, okay. So unique to John in the resurrection story, we did mention at the very, very beginning, I think right before you joined, Patty, Easter story is a little bit different in all four of the Gospels, and that's just it is. Get over it, right? Like, anytime somebody's like the Gospel's been translated perfectly, I'm like, it's not even close. And it's not that I still find the Gospel extremely valid. I think a lot of people, when they hear that, think that Gospel loses value. I actually think it gains value because then all of a sudden, instead of caring about exact words, we care about tones, we care about themes, we care about morals and messages, as opposed to just saying exact words and following, in all the lines. Now, John's Easter story includes two unique bits. And Patty, I'm going to return this to you. Peter, in the Gospel of John, is the first to enter Jesus' tomb, not the women. And Jesus carried the cross all by himself at the crucifixion. Again, the other three gospel writers differ on that one. John maybe gets a little, now he's 3 against 1, but John might get a little more weight just because he was actually behind the scenes. Patty, you can talk about those or none of those when you talk about the Easter story. I just figured I'd bring that up.
Oh, well, so actually that's that really wasn't what I was thinking about because like I don't know, like I have this I see the Bible so differently than so many people do, but I actually thought about like the resurrection, the story with Jesus's interaction after he rises again with Peter, and again it's like such a story of, so you have Peter, and John just really approaches it with, you have Peter who was so arrogant and obnoxious in his faith, like nobody loves Jesus more than me. I'm Peter, and he's just so obnoxious, and then he just runs and hides the minute everything gets bad, and Jesus dies alone without Peter, and Nicodemus and Joseph are the ones who take him off the cross and bathe him and put him in the tomb, and there's Jesus saying, do you love me? And Peter's like, of course I love you. And he's like, well, feed my children, feed my people. And he does this. And I don't know how many people catch it. He does it to him 3 times. And just like the cock crows 3 times. I mean, and, because Peter denied him 3 times. And so 3 times Jesus has Peter tell him that he loves him, he's going to feed him. And he's like, he gives Peter this redemption, and it's so wonderful because Peter never betrays him again. I mean, it's such a moment of redemption between him and Peter. And I love that he gave Peter what he needed to move forward and to be forgiven. And that was really nice.
Yeah. Aaron, any thoughts on that story? Jesus and Peter and resurrection and all that.
Yeah, I'm as y'all were talking, I was listening, but I was also going through specifically chapter 18 and the arrest of Jesus. And first of all, Judas's story in John is actually pretty fragmented. Like it's not unless I'm missing it somewhere else, it's actually not as well covered as in other books. But I was thinking about Judas as we're talking, yeah. And I was wondering, like, given the roles of the disciples and how close they were to Jesus, and how they all seem to have foibles, I guess, that like some tremendously out of character behavior as a result of the fact that they've seen this man perform miracles that you would think that they would be willing to just straight up die for him, and yet they all scatter to the wind. You know, I almost wonder if Judas was also similarly performing the role that he was meant to play in Jesus' story, as opposed to being the actual, like, the villain that we make him out to be. Like how much agency he had over his story.
The concept of agency probably would take a full episode. It's probably one we should do eventually, I think.
I would love to do a story on Judas.
Or just Judas. That's another one. By the way, up to like 9 of the apostles were actually named Judas. Just fun fact there.
Right.
They had to change a lot of their names. And I like that John at one point, it's like Judas, different one, not the one you're thinking of when he brings up one of the other Judases in the story. We're told that Judas was pilfering in John, that he actually, we're told in the other gospels he was in charge of the treasury, which we knew. We did not know that he was spending money on himself. So there is kind of an attempt to make, I even kind of like it. Like, to me, it's like makes it more poetic and interesting to have Judas be kind of like I love the poor so much that it's just led me to do this really dumb thing. But Judas was unfortunately a little more sinister than that. As far as like his agency and everything, it's something that people think about a lot, because I mean, even Jesus is like, I know you're gonna do it, right? Like,
right.
And we see Jesus be able to persuade somebody like Nicodemus out of it, whereas he can't reach Judas, like somebody who presumably loved him, cared about him, like, you know, somebody who has spent years with him, somebody who he's risked his life with, and
someone who's seen him, he sees him do multiple like miraculous things that he couldn't possibly conceive of how it's done.
Yeah,
I think that's what I don't get is, you know, like these figures in the Bible, they see miracles done. They see Moses parting the waters, and then they immediately, like 5 minutes later, you're reading, and they're like blaspheming God because he's not like feeding them whenever they're ready to be fed. You know, like all these people that see miracles performed directly in front of them, that they're like, there's no way to explain it beyond an act of God. And they immediately just do self-serving things right afterwards.
but I think we see this personally. I think we see this in real life too. I think people have miracles, things that can't be explained, things that they say, boy, I had this idea at the last, it just beamed into my brain, I did it and it saved a life and whatever. But it doesn't, you find that it doesn't change them fundamentally as people, you know, and they still struggle with many of the same things that they have before. We have this great example, and it's not in John, so forgive me for a moment. And funny, the story of Lazarus is from John, but the parable of Lazarus is not. And this is the one where the guy has a servant named Lazarus, and he mistreats him, and he dies, and he goes to hell. Lazarus goes to heaven. And he's like, well, could you at least resurrect Lazarus so he can like tell other people and everybody will like believe him because he got resurrected? And Jesus in the parable, I mean, the parable God is like, hey, I could resurrect somebody, bring him to life. They start talking to you, and people are just going to deny. And it's not going to matter. And then in real life, of course, this Jesus is showing a bit, maybe not omniscience, but some clairvoyance on this one, that he then actually resurrects somebody who is actually named Lazarus, and people actually deny it, right? Like, they actually fundamentally know he was dead. They witnessed it. They saw it. They denied it anyway. Or in the case of the Pharisees, so many people saw Lazarus get resurrected that at that point they couldn't even deny that the miracle happened. They said it was the devil that brought him back to life and zombie Lazarus. This was not an act of God. This was an act. And then we get a whole overarching theme, which I have here about works versus or belief through works, which is something I want to get to. I guess this is actually an appropriate conversation for it, but I'm going to get to it in a second because I'd rather turn it back to you and see kind of your thoughts on it, Aaron, because you're bringing this up. But like, I just think that there's a lot of people that a miracle just wouldn't change them. I think we like to think ourselves that it would. I think many people, I ask them, even non-religious people, about a miracle that happened in their lives, something that just can't have made sense, right? Like there's no other explanation. It's not odds, it's not chance, it's not anything. And they'll talk about it and they'll say it and they'll see it. And they're just people. Some of them,
Yeah, I guess
atheists, some whatever, it's just,
it might be a lack of perception on my part, like a lack of introspection. But I can't personally. I've never witnessed a miracle myself. Like I've never witnessed anything that just like defied belief, and I couldn't explain it through any other means. So I just don't have that personal connection.
yeah.
Or like I said, if it has happened, I just haven't been aware of it. Like I haven't like been perceptive enough to realize that was the case.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's a tie to it. The profession that has seen the most miracles is medical, and there are a higher number of. So these two are tied together. Is what I'll give this to you. I believe medical jobs also have like the highest number of faith believers that aren't like clerical, right? Like, and it's as a result of seeing so many miracles, right? Like you see somebody and they're dying of cancer, and then you see it cleared up, and you're just like, this is not the way cancer cells work. Like something happened, you know what I mean? And so I understand, like those two are absolutely tied together. It's just, you'd think it would be more extreme. So I will grant you that. Like it is one of those, I feel like if God poked his head down from the clouds and was like, hey, it's me, I'm God. My name's Dwayne. I'm real. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good one. I'm going to be back in like 2,000 years. I would love to think that would sustain us for 2,000 years, that we would just be a very obedient, God believing, everybody saw it, everybody knows it happened kind of thing. But it's not, Patty, I'm going to give it to you before I go off, because the very next thing I'm going to get into is about this. I'm going to make this miracles and works thing and about how those are tied together. So
I want to hear that. Go for it.
Well, regardless whatever I say about miracles, that can feel like a magic trick. But somebody feeding you does not feel like a magic trick. That is something that does strike you in a profound way if you are starving to death. It might not be what we would call a miracle, like nobody hacked the code or broke anything. We're told that Jesus actually did do that when he fed some people at one point. But regardless of that, if somebody just gave you a fish, that's still more impactful than like watching David Copperfield, you know what I mean? Like it's just, one is like, that was so cool, that was really rad. One of them's like, that saved my life and that changed who I was as a person. So throughout John, Jesus on 3 occasions, I believe I counted, a lot of notes on John. Oh yeah, another page on John too. That 3 times Jesus is like, let's say you don't believe me, right? Let's say you don't believe me, right? Like we don't speak the same language or something, right? And you just think I'm full of hot air. Do my works not speak for themselves? Like, what is the result of what I'm doing here? And this kind of gets into what's called Christian consequentialism. And this is something that I admit, I am not an ends justify the means person, but I do believe that if you are living righteously, the ends will show that. Now, sometimes that end is death. And so we need to kind of have a conversation about like what ends we're talking about. Like for what I'm basically talking about, if the fruit is good, the tree is good. That verse that Jesus brings up, right? And so what are the fruits? Well, the fruits of the Spirit aren't like everlasting money and you win all the gold medals, right. But they are, kindness, gentleness, love, peace, all those fruits of the Spirit,
Oh, so Aaron.
I know. I need Aaron's feedback on this one. I am sure
I'll take nothing from the fact this is where he left.
Right. All right, pause. We're not allowed to talk about anything. How about those Olympics? Huh? No. But when we talk about this, we're talking about like, now I'm all confuzzled. Okay, so
about the fruit of the Spirit, and that is more impactful. Right. Yeah.
So when Jesus is like, look at my works, like, do my works not speak for themselves? Like, just can like, that's an okay way to judge something. that if it's good or bad, you're going to see it manifest. And this is something I try to tell Christians a lot, because I think we lose sight of it a lot, in that we think we have proper doctrine. The results of those doctrines are that people are killing themselves and being depressed and sad, and they feel valueless and worthless. And I'm just like, man, Jesus says all the law and the prophets hang on this, right? All of it, not just a little bit. Even if you are super 100% sure that women shouldn't be able to preach, to men. Okay, you're 100% sure. Let's say that's actually what it says. And I'm just some Hody theology guy that tries to wiggle worm his way around and say why women can't. Okay, let's say that. What's the result? Is the result that you never learn a thing from women in your churches? If so, I get fruits you don't get. Therefore, I win, right? Like, even if you are correctly interpreting things, the works are everything, right? Like, that this is the result of it, that the works speak for themselves. So if Jesus is bringing you healing with his way of life, you can say it's from the devil, but you're wrong. Now, I think Christians worry, because then all of a sudden they go, what if Satan cherishes us? What if he out charities us? What if he out peaces us? First of all, if Satan's doing that, you are not practicing very good Christianity, my friend.
I know, right? If Satan can outgood you, wow.
Then I'm a Satanist, right?
Yeah,
like,
right?
I mean, just like that, Yeah,
it's like there's something wrong, because I just want to give Christians a reality check. If Satan's doing Christianity better than Christians are, Christians aren't Christianing right. It's kind of like if communists are doing democracy better than the people in democracy are doing, then democracy people aren't doing democracy right.
Right.
Just take note. Satan should never be doing Christianity better than Christians.
Right. Because the issue is these Christians, they're so used to dismissing all these things as sin, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I'll make it blatant. Like, they'll just say like gay, oh, that's a sin, right? Like, okay, that's a sin. And I found this verse, and Hody, I don't like all the verses that you found. And I know you cited this expert over here, and I know you got this document in this original language, but I still think it's a sin. All right. What's the result of it? What is the result then of you casting out homosexuals as sinners, right? When I see a couple that is loved and affirmed, and they adopt, or, and they love each other, and they help out with my church fundraisers, and they get people in homes, and they get people fed, and the fruits are there. I don't know what to tell you. The fruits are there. And that's all there is to it. Like, Jesus said himself, all the law and the gospels hang on it, not just a couple, all of it. So like, even if you're right and you think all the stuff that I found is just wrong, or me trying to like wiggle around or something like that, ultimately this is the test, right? Now, there are some things now, and the other worry that I get from Christians, it's like, what? So just there's no such thing as sin, that everything's okay all of a sudden. Well, you show me a good way to commit adultery that doesn't have bad fruits. I'll wait, right? Like,
right.
No, of course, right? It's got bad fruits. You wreck trust. There's a conscience toll that you pay from it. You know what I mean? Like everything like that. I'm not saying everything is suddenly on the table. There's no like cool way to murder somebody, that's going to be good with it. So like, I still
no
believe
noble way to rape.
Right. Yes. Things like that. There's no good way about it. But for me, like when Jesus says like, let my work speak for themselves, because people get tripped up on Christ's language, and Christ seems to acknowledge they're getting tripped up on his language a lot. He likes the flowers. He likes the parables. We actually don't get many of them in John, which is interesting because he seems to love poetry. And I think maybe the parables are a little too on the nose for John. So he kind of leaves those to the other gospels. But, Jesus is he's letting his work speak for themselves. And I think that we really get that through in the Gospel of John more than any of the other ones, that Jesus is like, listen, you can reject all my theology, but believe in me because of the results that I get. And I think that is still on the table today. People might not believe your miracles, but man, if you are doing good works in your community, I don't know how many people can hate you, right? Like, I don't see a way Christianity fails if we start focusing. I believe that we're saved by faith and not by works, by the way. I don't want to, I'm not preaching bad theology.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I'm not
just making that right clear.
I'm not a works preaching person.
Right.
But I do believe that what is in your heart will come out in your works, and
Yeah.
how you behave.
Yeah, and that's basically that's my spiel that I had for it. Any thoughts that you have about miracles, works, faith, the way
Yeah.
Jesus did it, all that?
Yeah. Because I think because as a long time Christian, I got born again at 14, and I have run the gamut of churches, from Pentecostal to Catholic, and fundamentalist, non-fundamentalist, I'm probably, in fact, the only thing I haven't been actually is Mormon, but my grandma was Mormon, so I'll claim that. And the one thing that I've noticed in most, a lot of churches that I've been involved in, is that inevitably you will have inside that church is a group of people that I don't even know how to say this right, are better than everybody else. It inevitably will happen. And like every church has their Pharisees, and bless their hearts, because you always say that before you insult somebody. But bless their hearts is that it comes back to Christians a lot of times cannot help but do that, with the I know more Bible than you know. I know I'm smarter when it comes to the Gospels. I can rightly divide the word better than you can. No, Patty, you got that. You got it wrong. It's not agape, it's phileo. It's it's like, oh, for goodness sakes, and they get so caught up on the nuances of the Bible that they forget the overall theme of the Bible. And this is where like the Pharisees went wrong and the Sadducees went wrong with Jesus. And this continues to be the long-term problem with Christianity, is that Christianity is about being Christ-like. It's about following Christ and Christ's behavior and Christ's love and who Christ was in his relationship with God. And this is the thing that I don't think people quite understand, is that what made Jesus spectacular wasn't the fact that he could go into the temple and quote the tablets. The Pharisees could do that. That didn't make Jesus spectacular. What made Jesus spectacular was his relationship with God. That was what made him amazing. And he tried to bring everybody else into that relationship with God. Most people didn't understand it, but they felt it. And they wanted to understand what was made him special. And that's why they kept following him, because they kept trying to figure out, what is it about this man that makes him different than the people in the temple that are reading the tablets? Because he is clearly different. And that's what they were drawn to. And that's what people don't understand, is what keeps drawing people to Christians like that is their relationship with God, not their ability to be able to decipher some verse. I mean, that's great. I mean, God bless them. I love people who can do that. But that's not what makes them amazing. What makes them amazing is a relationship with God, because when you have that relationship with God, you automatically understand why people are more important than being able to know the difference between agape and phileo love. I mean, which, by the way, I don't really understand the difference between agape and phileo love. So everybody feel free to tell me.
I'm sure that there will be a comment or two about
I'm
that.
sure everybody will tell me.
No,
thank you for telling me. I want to know.
I love the way you say it, though, because it's like, this is the exact way I feel about it. It's just, when I was studying theology, I had to come to grips with the fact that, one, I was never going to know more than anybody else at anything. Like, there are people who have spent 60 years of their human lives studying one book, or even part of a book of the Bible, or even one culture during a brief, 50-year period. And when I say they spent 60 years, I mean spent it. To the point of lived there, studied it, read the language, uncovered it, looked at artifacts or whatever. So when I'm studying general theology, I am dipping a toe into 1,000 different people's pools. And some of these pools go down for miles, right? My knowledge will never exceed that. Ever. Yeah. I could spend the rest of my life now dedicating one thing, but I'm 40, right? I'm almost 40. I've waited too long And so at this point I can start and I would die. Even if I focused on one thing, somebody else will still have done more than me knowledge wise in that thing. So that's not really where I can make a difference. It's not that you shouldn't try. I talk because I think I have a perspective and voice that people like to hear. And I think it relates to people. And I think it's the reason I was born during this time. So I'm not putting myself down by any means. I just simply am very aware of how completely overwhelmed intellectually I am dwarfed by people, right? Like
Right.
I love what I have learned. I'm excited about it. But I mean, it's like being excited to get like try a couple chicken nuggets on McDonald's and there's like a whole menu that I don't know about. Like there's so much here that there's just no way I would be able to cover it all. But you feed somebody who is starving to death, all the knowledge in the world wasn't going to feed that person.
Right.
All the
Right.
theory and the anthropology and the whatever, if your kid goes before you and they say, Dad, I'm really struggling with something, and you can help them, you are the guy. You are the girl. You are the one person who is able to be like, I can stand in and help you in this situation. I am in this moment, right? Like part of the issue I have with Christians, again, is we get out of the moment. We start living in theory as opposed to living our lives. This gospel was written assuming that no one would read it.
Yeah.
There was Jesus didn't have a dedicated scribe. He didn't, and there was a long period where nobody read it for like 1,000+ years. Even the people who believed in it, people today still too busy to doing other things to read it. It was not written just so that you could know and know and know some more. The gospel is a kinetic gospel. If God is love, and we've already talked about that, and love is a verb, then the verb is in the doing, the serving God. Jesus, when they're like, we said we knew all these things, and God's like, I don't even know who you are. But these people over here who don't think they know who I am did everything right. They didn't know my name. They didn't know who I was. But what they did is they were like, oh, I visited somebody in prison. I fed somebody. I took care of somebody when they were getting bullied. I gave somebody a coat when they were cold. That was the gospel. That's what the faith was, Right. And so to me, that is like such a powerful testament about what, because we get so worried, like, oh, what did all the people who died before they didn't know the gospel know? No, people know the gospel, right? They just don't read, as much as what some other people read. Yeah.
Right. You're right. That's what I think. I think a lot of Christians, and I use that term loosely because you have to be, carry that label. But, a lot of, the people forget that, I think it was like the 16th century is when the Bible finally went into print. Was it with the Gutenheimer press? Was that what it was? I see, I'm so stupid. I don't even know when the first printing of the Bible came out.
But Gutenberg, yeah.
Gutenberg, yeah. Yeah, Gutenheimer. I don't even know what it's called.
I like Gutenheimer too.
Yes, someone will correct me. But I mean, the thing is, like you just made a very profound statement. I mean, there are people out there who have dedicated their lives to like one little nuance of the Bible, and these people are remarkable. I mean, they're scholars. They're amazing, and thank goodness for them, because for them, we learned the most remarkable things about God and about the Bible, and I cherish the fact that they are there and out there teaching. And this is what makes it so remarkable, because this is where the body of Christ comes in, right? This is where every member of the body is, we all have different parts of the body, but we're all part of the body, right? And so you have people like me, who's obviously never going to be the brain, and and I'm okay with that.
Me too. You're good.
So, but that's okay, because I don't mind, being, part of the feet that walk around, and just kind of trudge around and just kind of like check it out and be there. And, if you need, or like the hand that maybe picks you up and helps and dust you off. I mean, that's fine. I don't mind that, because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I do know that if I can help bring somebody to the brain and that brain can teach them, that's amazing. Or bring them to the heart and the heart can heal them. them, that's amazing. I mean, I don't mind having that role. And here, who knows that maybe someday I'll meet somebody and because of something nice that I do, they'll go and they'll become the new brain. I mean, you never know what your role is going to be, but as long as you're open to be part of that body of Christ, you're going to have an amazing role, amazing function, and God wants you to be there. And he just really, all he wants is just a relationship with you. And you don't have to figure out what your role is anyways, because God knows what it is. And your role is just to kind of have that relationship with God and let him worry about the rest. And I don't know, I don't want to actually be the brain, because that seems like a whole lot of work. Responsibility, because the brain has to be sure what they do, and I don't want to be telling people wrong stuff anyway. So
it's all good. I love the way that you're talking about this in the parts of the body, because it's the way the Gospels describe it too, is that we are the body of Christ, right? Like the church is the body of Christ. You can only be one molecule on that body,
right?
Some people are, you're like, boy, they're so calloused, but they're strong. Maybe they're a foot person, right? This person has vision, but nothing behind it. Okay, great eye person, right? Like, I think what we try to do is we try to be self-contained. We try to understand the whole faith on our own. It's never going to happen. Like, I am telling you as somebody who majored in theology, that if this is a 12-foot pool of water, that I am a half an inch deep, and the greatest scholar ever known goes about a foot deep, and God's knowledge is all the way to the bottom of the 20-foot pool, right? Like, nobody's going to have it, right? Even if you're a molecule of the brain, you're one neuron, right? Okay, well then your job is to know like one thing maybe, and then what do neurons do? Okay, pass that electricity on through me to somebody else, right? Like I'll share my knowledge with you if I can or whatever, but like it's off of me, it's on to somebody else. And you're nothing if you don't coordinate with the other neurons, right? You're nothing if you don't coordinate with other people like you. I think there's a ton of people out there that feel this burden, and they say like, what if I didn't know the right God, or I didn't do the right thing?
That's me.
but they're just body people. Right. Like I think that gets lost when we talk about our worship God with like loving God with like all our like might. Right. Yeah. Like some people aren't gonna have the same mind and the same heart and everything like that, but they can show up. Oh my goodness, if Christians would show up to stuff, right? Like if we started worshiping people with our might more than our minds and heart, I will make that trade in today's Christianity in an instant. Like just have people show up. That's all I need is somebody willing to move some things. Like, trust me, what your neighbor needs right now, probably more than you being like praying for you, bro, or the like, hey, come join church with us someday, is probably somebody to shovel like their walkway when it gets snowy out, right? Or somebody to, spend some time with them when they're lonely. You're just showing up. That's really it.
What? Can I just say something? Because I just want to say something really just nice about my neighbors, because this is something really wonderful that I just I am flanked on all sides by every religion. I live in this cul-de-sac, and on my right hand side is as I'm sitting here are the Mormon family, and on my left hand side are the Catholics. And I sit in the middle, and Republicans, Democrats, and me. And so it's like, this is, and when my husband left me, both my neighbors, they were both, Lloyd and Robert were both horrified, because they are, Catholic and Mormon, and very, strong in their belief that marriage is forever. And what they both did, which I really, golly, I just respect this so much, is that they, without me asking, because of their faith, started taking care of me without me knowing it. And so, like when it would snow, they would come over and they would both shovel my walk, and I would wake up to like my walks being shoveled. And then I started noticing in the summer. One day I looked out my window, and Lloyd was out there pulling my weeds, and Robert was mowing my lawn. And these were the things that, like, I don't want to go to the Mormon church, and I don't want to go to the Catholic church, but if anything would have made me go, those two men, and how much them and their wives took care of me during a very rough point of my life, would have would have brought me to their churches and their faith. And they didn't tell me they were doing it. I just happened to start noticing them doing it. But they did it because they were gentle, they were kind, and they loved me, and they saw that I was in deep need at the time. And that, by the way, is like, if anybody wants to know what genuine love and sacrifice looks like, that's what it looks like, to see men going out in the cold and the snow or the heat and the sun and taking care of somebody. That is genuine devotion. That's how I really just saw such godly love between those two men.
Yeah. I think we've said what we want to say on this one, but the fact that is a reoccurring theme in John is just let the works speak for themselves. The works are like, show them, not everybody's going to believe it if you say it. So show them. It is a lot easier to believe somebody that shows it than somebody says it. Talk is really cheap. What I'm doing is really easy. Showing up, being there for somebody, giving somebody good guidance. I think a lot of times, we get so focused, and I like focusing on it, feeding the homeless and needy and immigrants and everything, and giving them homes and water and places to stay and clothing. Wonderful stuff. Most churches have an outreach like that, but you don't have to, usually you don't even have to leave your home to be the thing that nobody else can fulfill that role in their life, So just, look for opportunities inside your four walls, or, within your community or at work. If you're the guy who makes work go by more cheery for everybody, think about like somebody who makes work more cheery for you, and what are they worth to you, right? Like, what's that value that you get from them? And that's their work speaking for themselves, just that's the work. So we got a lot of that. I'm going to do some quick breakdowns here just because I just want to get to some other stories in John. I love that. So at the beginning, John has obviously already lived through the Acts situation at this point. And he's writing this while he's in exile in retrospect, right? Or at least he is experiencing Acts in real time. And so we shouldn't be surprised that once again, he reiterates this issue with the law through Moses versus the grace and truth through Jesus, which he says in a verse. And again, these are things that aren't supposed to conflict, but when the law of Moses conflicts with the great grace and the truth and the right thing to do and what your conscience tells you to do, you got to go with the latter one. It's just the law of Moses people, obviously, at this point, it's funny because the law of Moses is usually spoken of positively, but at the point where they're at is spoken of with basically contempt, that these people have become the antagonists. And it's that they're holding on to this dead thing. And John just says, it's worn out's welcome, I guess, like we have it, we get it. I understand the purpose of the law. Jesus goes on to talk about the law of Moses. He says in the middle of John, if you believe Moses, you'll believe me, right? Like, because nobody kept the law. That's not a good way for people to live. We're all waiting on the next step of the law of Moses, right? We're all waiting on a Messiah. We all knew that this isn't tenable. Right? Like, so if you really are like a big law of Moses person, then you'll be big on me, because the issue is, and I love the way Jesus says this, because if you're big on the law of Moses, you're actually also big on against the law of Moses, because the law of Moses contradicts itself. So like, it's impossible to be big on the law of Moses. You either held on to the law of Moses knowing it was a temporary but necessary step, and then Jesus shows up and you go, thank God we hit the next step. Or you say, no, I'm sticking to this step here. I really love this step. This is the final program right here, is this step. This is what I'm all about here. And it's like, man, I don't know how you get into that, because nobody's keeping these laws.
Yeah.
This gets brought up. Jesus brings that up specifically after he heals the invalid. He cuts the line, heals the invalid. And then he's like, oh yeah, pick up your mat and walk. And this story gets left out in the other gospels.
Yeah,
we know the pick up your mat and walk, but the Pharisees see the guy get healed, and instead of being like, oh my gosh, he just got healed, they're like, why are you carrying your mat on the Sabbath? You're not supposed to carry anything.
Well, and the guy rats him out too, by the way. I mean, let's because the guy doesn't know it's Jesus. Then later he points out Jesus, goes like, who is it? Well, I don't know. And then later, oh, there he is. There's the guy. And that's what gets Jesus in trouble. I mean,
he told me I could pick up my mat, right?
yeah,
Like,
that guy told me. It's like, but yeah. So you know, can we just talk about just how horrible the Pharisees are? Because
yeah.
like working on the Sabbath, you could die, you could be killed for that. They could stone you for that. And like they were like instead of saying, "Oh my God, Jesus healed like this guy, like." You know, he's able to pick up his own mat and walk away. And instead of having these people carry him, what a miracle, what a miracle. They were like, who told you could do that work on the Sabbath? I mean, they were just so obnoxious. And so like, they're like, who told you? Like, we're going to stone you for doing work if you don't tell us. And it's like, oh my God, you're so evil. It's like, if there was like evil music we could play at that scene in the Bible, it would be there. They're so awful. They're so awful.
I'm just gonna briefly go down some of my Pharisees being awful in here.
Yeah, good. Like Pharisees behaving badly.
They do the circumcision on the Sabbath, but they won't do other like. I mean, and he's like, you could schedule the circumcision on any day,
right? Well, because you have to do it on the 8th day, right?
Right. Yeah. You're allowed to do that any other day, but you choose to do it. And she's
Yeah.
like, I don't blame you for that. All I'm asking is the same grace you give yourselves to do your work on the Sabbath, you give to other people. He also says God works on the Sabbath. My Father works on the Sabbath. So what do you think he doesn't heal people and he's working on the Sabbath? Like, are you serious? It's not about the work. Keeping the Sabbath holy is not about stagnation. It's not about attending a place on time. It's about keeping it holy. It's good. Like, I'm a pro Sabbath guy. Jesus still recognized the Sabbath. I think it's good for us to take a day out of the week to refocus ourselves. But that doesn't mean it's just a day of like sitting and watching football, right? Like sometimes that's like, do we not think that thinking like if you keep the Sabbath, keeping it holy actually takes a lot of work if you think about it. Right. Like, and Jesus is like, yeah, it's a lot of work. So it's okay to acknowledge that it takes a lot of work. Yeah, God works on the Sabbath. Is he a sinner? I should have brought this up with your Nicodemus point that the guards didn't arrest Jesus because they liked him after the healing of the man. Yeah. That they tell the guards and the guards are like, no, he's cool. Yeah. And it's like, oh, and they're like, oh no, even the guards are on his side.
Yeah.
What the Pharisees do with the blind man, where they do it, it's either him or us. Like the classic, like, well, you either go with that guy who the devil is in him and he's preaching all kinds of bad theology. And yeah, I guess he heals some blind people, or it's us. And this is a really sinister thing because when I was studying undue influence and like cults and things like that, psychologically, they talk about ways to change people's mind and undisputed right now. They're the top two ways. One is threaten somebody's life. We'll get them to change their mind. Two is threaten their social circle. Yeah. And so this is really a damnable thing that they're doing because it's both those things, by the way, are not a good way to get somebody to change their mind. As soon as you leave their room, they're going to unchange their minds, right? Like this is why Christians need to be so, it's not easy to convert people to Christianity. Right. Like, I mean, first of all, God has to do it. You don't really do it. But secondly, it's not like selling a car where it's like if you got them to sign on the line, it's over. You won. You made the sale. Whatever happens from there. That coercive techniques are really effective when we talk about psychology. But the issue with coercive techniques is they lead you to the devil's conclusion when you follow them out. Who's going to threaten your life more than the devil? Right. Like if you are influenced by people who threaten your life, well, think about politicians. I mean, you're just going to worship some politician, whoever threatens to kill you the least. You know, you'll worship warlords. You know, this is, and so when you convert somebody to a religion of peace, you say, I'm putting away my sword. Like Christianity is the one that says, keep your sword, leave it sheathed, right? Like we're the one religion that's called to do that. Okay, that makes converting people incredibly difficult because you've just taken the number one way to get people to change their minds and left it in your hilt, you know? So when we look at this, when we see what the Pharisees are doing, this is really sinister because Jesus is, of course, trying to change people's minds the good way, the healthy way. Your mind should be improved by love. When we talk about cults and undue influence, what the difference between a cult and a religion is a religion will give you due influence. The person will earn influence with your life and encourage you to make healthy decisions. And you'll have a symbiotic relationship with anybody who is a good religious advisor. But a bad one, And something like what the Pharisees will do is they say, I'll cut you off.
Yeah.
No. And we're talking in their minds, forgiveness of sins, gone. You're not able to, we won't perform your forgiveness of sins ceremony anymore. We won't perform your marriage ceremonies anymore. We won't perform that. So when they're saying it's him or us, it's more than just like be our friend or be his friend. He is threatening their whole social circle as well as like their immortal souls. And so like Caiaphas and the Pharisees are really bad dudes.
By the way, can I just say, like, I'm backing up a little because we can go back to the guy with the mat too. I mean, there, it's not, it's not just, like threatening their social circle. They also gaslight too. I mean, that's something else that you can, if you want to know whether or not somebody is genuine or not, pay attention to how much, to whether they lie, cheat, steal, rearrange the truth or whatever to make their point. Like Jesus never does this. Like Jesus is very clear in what he does. But if you have to lie or change or grasp onto something to make somebody a villain in a story where a villain is not required, there is something wrong with them. Because, like, for example, and like using this, like what the Pharisees did is you have this amazing miracle where this guy, he's at the well, he's at the pool, he's paralyzed, and Jesus walks over, he heals him, he says, take up your mat and leave. And instead of the Pharisees, concentrating on that, what they say is he healed on the Sabbath, therefore he broke the law, he broke the law, he broke the law. And they're like, see, instead of saying, and trying to get Jesus to like answer to that, instead of getting the people to recognize that actually what Jesus did was unbelievable. He healed a lame man, and the man who had to be carried over to the pool was able to get up and walk. And by the way, by carrying the mat, he actually took away the labor of the people that had to carry the mat. So actually, that was actually a good thing. Labor no longer had to be required by other people. So this was actually removing labor. And like, but like they didn't address this. And this is like this gaslighting thing that goes on. And so like when you see people using these techniques, it's like, run from that. This is like such, and this is what the devil did with Eve. I mean, this is like the oldest technique ever. So yeah, and this is one thing like John really, like you can see, like just really annoys John because John brings this up over and over and over again. I'm really glad he does, and I'm glad you brought this up. Like especially Caiaphas. Well, there's a guy. Anyways,
I wrote next to Caiaphas in my notes. He's just the gotta break some eggs guy because even the Pharisees are like, hey, like I understand you don't like him, but like killing him, that seems to be against more of our tenets, or lying about him, that seems to be against more of our tenets than just like some bad theology. And Caiaphas is like, you don't understand. If this doesn't get stopped now, it's just going to keep growing and growing. And boy, was Caiaphas right about that.
Yeah.
The only way is, I like that after, so going back to like the gaslighting thing with the guy with the mat, what did they do? They went and got his mom. Yeah. And they were like, let's talk to his parents.
I know, right? Because it never ends with these kind of people.
Right. Well, was he lame from birth? And when they're like, yeah, he was, it was like, okay, we'll threaten your social circle now unless you say that he wasn't lame from birth. It's like, you guys just witnessed a miracle, and what you're doing, like all you're trying to do is discredit this guy.
Right. It's so horrible. Like you hate him so much. You refuse to acknowledge that he's done nothing wrong. Like Jesus, like this is the disgusting part about it all is that Jesus didn't do anything wrong. Jesus healed a lame man. He helped a lame man walk. He changed that man's life. He changed that man's life. He made it better. He made it miraculous. That was the only thing he did. They were incensed over that because they hated Jesus, because Jesus was destroying their way of life. And they didn't want people to like Jesus. So the only thing they could do was edgelord Jesus. It's like, that's really what it came down to.
They really, yeah. I mean, and you got to think with how dumb this is something that I noticed since you talk about edgelording. One of the things that you'll notice with like, I guess I'll say with like far right, like podcasters and stuff, is they change their morals depending on the issue. right? Like
Yeah.
just all the time. And the way they choose to deal with Jesus changes so rapidly. They go from being like no, these miracles aren't real. Like they're not real. And then everybody knows they're real. And instead of that,
Right.
what they do, they try to shut it up. They try to ignore. They say silence. Hey, it's forbidden to talk about it now. Shh, we're going to go on a silence.
Yeah.
Silence doesn't work. What do they go to next? Okay. Silence didn't work. It's from the devil though. It's from the devil.
Yeah.
And like
Right.
this, you just see the goalposts just moving and
Yeah.
moving and moving. And because at first,
Hey,
it
what's
was
going to
like,
stick? We're just going to keep throwing this ball out.
right.
Yeah.
It's not real. It's not this, it's not this. So the problem is they're shooting 100 arrows. And since they're missing all of them, people are kind of like, you're not hitting anything with your arrows. He's hitting bullseyes.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to go with him, which is why, I mean, Jesus embarrasses them. And if we want to copy that example, that I think we do what Jesus did. We shoot very few times, but we shoot accurately and we make it count versus the Pharisees, which is just, I mean, you look at these and I'll expand this to all creators at this point, but just that turn into these content farms that just speak and speak and speak. And the more you listen to them, the more you go like, but if I keep the same attitude that you have about women as I do about Christians, then I would actually hate them too. And I don't hate women. But they'll change their philosophy in an instant. In between videos, they'll change their philosophy because it's not about the philosophy. Like the meeting with Caiaphas makes it abundantly clear. It's not about policy or philosophy. It's about shutting this guy up and getting business as normal to resume.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, business is in normal is something that they see as like a holy, great, wonderful thing. There's a lot of improvement that has to be done with this church, Mr. Caiaphas, and certainly I would say the same of the Christian church today.
Yeah.
All right, last couple points here because actually I'm actually running out of my notes, which is fantastic. I like that John calls himself the one Jesus loved. That's just cute. And then I had
Just cute.
It's just cute. I like that. It's like, because a lot of people, when you read John, you're like,
I
who
was
is the
Jesus'
one
favorite.
who is the one Jesus loved, right? Like, did he not love the rest? It's just kind of like me. Of course, the idea is it just made him feel special. And so he's like, I can't believe he loved me. It's really a cute thing. It's just funny when you read it without that understanding. And then I had one other note. Oh, the whole story of turning water into wine. I don't have a lot to say about it. It is interesting that is regarded as Christ's first miracle. It kind of isn't because to me, he's reading people's minds before that, but this actually is regarded as first miracle. This only shows up in John. And the reason it only shows up in John is because he does it. Jesus even says, it's not my time yet. Like I'm not doing miracles until it's like prime time and it's not really prime time yet. They convince him to do it anyway, which is kind of interesting to think that Jesus can be reasoned with, but he could. I think that should be an inspiring thing that even Jesus, you could change his mind while he was here on the earth about something to be like, I don't want to change the water into wine just yet. Like that seems like a weird thing. And they're like, please. And he goes, all right, fair enough. And so, what the heck? Obviously he serves the best wine. Probably what most scholars would say is ordinarily the most alcoholic wine. So if Jesus is going to make a brew, he's going to make it a good brew, Yeah. Any thoughts you have about the water and wine story? I don't find it all that fascinating, but it's interesting that it's the one that he chose to do first.
Yeah, well, no, it's just that they said they were he made the host look really good because everybody was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you saved the best wine for last. I mean, apparently they served the best wine first, and everybody was like, oh my God, this is the best wine. I can't believe you saved it. But he also saved the wedding. I mean, because I mean, if you think about it, like his mom was obviously concerned about it because she's like, hey, Jesus, the wine, we're running out of wine. I mean, and weddings are a big deal. It was about, saving face of this, whoever the wedding was at. I mean, he obviously knew the people and they were obviously friends of his mom because his mom got concerned over the lack of wine, so much so that she went to Jesus and, which kind of says something about like, she knew her little boy, she knew what he could do, and she's like, hey dude,
right.
And he's just like, Mom,
not yet.
Mom, come on, Mom.
I thought the first miracle was going to be like, I had this cool plan. You want it to be wine?
like John and I had this whole thing like with a dove and da, 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 you know, and John's like,
Thought I was gonna be the first one. That's
there
hilarious.
goes Mom. Aunt Mary, come on, you know, come on. But yeah, no, but obviously it had to have been somebody that he knew, that he was friends with, because this had, you know, like, and it kind of just shows like Jesus stopped somebody from being humiliated. I mean, this is really what it's about. I mean, because if they would have ran out of wine, the family would have been humiliated. This would have been a shame put upon them. His mother obviously knew it, which is why she went to him. And so it's interesting when you think about it, like his first miracle was actually to stop the humiliation of somebody, whoever it was. We don't even know who it was, but it was a very selfless act, and it was very sweet. It was very kind, very human.
Yeah. So these were actually going to be my closing statements. I don't think I guess we're basically about there. We got like 10 minutes to go. So I'll just go ahead and say this. I won't force you into closing statements in case this gives you something to talk about. But just what I say is, to me, John is definitely the most humanizing of the Gospels for Jesus. It's the only place where we get that story. We didn't even talk about the story because it's almost nonsense that it's in there, because there's nothing really profound about it, but him just grilling and eating with the apostles. That's a really cool thing that like John felt the need to include that there, that it was like, we also had, like, we were human beings, right? Like we still chilled and ate together sometimes, and Jesus cooked sometimes, you know? I like that. It's also the Jesus wept, right? It's the shortest verse in the Bible. That's only mentioned in John, because the whole story of Lazarus is only mentioned in John. We really don't, Jesus, I think people want to make him God so much that he gains a severity, right? There's similar to the God of the Old Testament that we see, this severe, and I don't want to say severe in like, because nobody thinks he was like brutal or violent, but almost like above it all. Like, you know, the one gospel that interprets what he says is, you must hate your mother and brother to follow me. And yet here we have this where it's like he cries when his cousin's dead, and then like he feels bad for like somebody's wedding day might get ruined, and that he, you know, and then he really loves his mom. He's up on the cross and he's like, oh, hey, where's my mom? Like, I'm really scared right now. I want to talk to my mom. That this is a guy who, it's one thing to say that Jesus understands us, but is this understanding like under a microscope, or is this like he gets us? I love the he gets us commercials. Maybe that might be a whole other thing, but and I understand there's like weird money behind it, and like people are like, what if it goes bad someday? Right now, they're kind of leaning on the progressive Christian thing, which I enjoy the message, right? But it's not just he understands us as one would understand the subject of a book. It's that he gets us. Like, not just, oh, yes, I understand what it's like to miss your mother. Your front cerebellum will spark and create a feeling of pain. No, he missed his mom too, right? Like, that's the way that Jesus gets you. It's not, I mean, of course, it is also in a very cerebral, I designed you, I know every cell of your body. Like, I mean, whatever he says, you know, I know which way the wind blows. I know where leaves fall. I take care of birds. Of course I take care of you. Like, I understand every cell of your body. Right. Like so like obviously understands you in that sense. But I think this is like really the gospel to me that hammers home how human he made himself, that he still was willing to experience feelings of family, feelings of friendship, feelings of joy and laughter and fun and lightheartedness and humor, as well as the flip side of that, feelings of betrayal and loss and sorrow and worry and fear. And we get all this, and thankfully we get it because John spent the behind the scenes time with him. That in public, it's so easy to see a guy that can like reads your brain, does a magic trick and heals a bunch of people and be like, that's God, right? Like, what did I see? Like, that was just this flash of brilliance. Yeah. At the same time, and this is one verse, I guess, one passage we didn't talk about, and it's somewhat important, but it's only mentioned in John. He's the guy who washed his disciples' feet, right? Like, this is a guy who is just like behind the scenes, just being like, man, I just love these people. You know what I mean? Like, and I love what it says about, you know, because it really is humanizing, because, you know, Peter's like, no, you're up here. I'm like, no, what makes me God is the opposite of being up here. It's that I'm down here. Like, this is what makes me divine. You know, if I'm just up there, I'm an idol. I'm an idea. I'm a story. I'm a vengeful creator. I'm this terrible, wonderful, awesome, powerful thing. Right now, I'm just some guy you're having dinner with, and I'm aware we don't have a lot of time together. I want to spend that as best as we possibly can. The knowledge to me that Jesus understood us that well is so powerful to me, because we tend to think of like God as this, like, and I'm not saying this makes him not perfect. In fact, I'm saying it makes him more perfect, but this pristine, untouched, beautiful marvel thing that you look at from a distance, when in reality, he got dirty, he got sweaty and bloody and sad. And he understand, oh, like sad when somebody steals his toy ball, right? Like, I mean, these are things that Jesus experienced, that he felt the way you would feel them. And it's not like him being high and mighty and understanding everything made any difference in the way that he felt. And I just find such a connection with Christ that way, because every time I try to make him this like awesome counselor, brainiac, whatever, it pushes him away. And in reality, he wanted to be close to me. And so I need to understand that it's okay to think of God as that awesome counselor, as long as you're always remembering that his goal wasn't to be above you. It was to be right next to you. And that's, I mean, that to me, when I finished the Gospel of John, that was just kind of one of the things that stuck out to me. Any thoughts about that, or any closing thoughts that you had about the Gospel of John?
Yeah, see, I agree with you on so much of that, because you know, Jesus is all about relationships, and God is all about relationships. And you know, Jesus tried very hard to build that into the apostles while he was on earth. You know, that it was about relationships, and I you know, he failed miserably, because you know, while he was alive, you know, the apostles, you could tell, could not get it past, because they couldn't get past the fact that they were waiting for him to unsheath his sword and come out as the king, and you know, do that one wave that would just, you know, miraculously kill all the Roman soldiers, and he would take his throne and they would rule next to him. You could see that was, you know, they were just waiting for that, you know. And when that, you know, didn't happen and he died, you know, they all deserted him except for, you know, Nicodemus and Joseph of Joseph of Arimathea. I hope I got that right.
You got it.
Yeah. But, you know, except for those two. And it's interesting because you bring up the washing of the feet. But in contrast, when it came time when you know, when they were talking about washing feet, it was like Jesus needed to be washed, you know, when he died. And they weren't there. You know, the washing of Jesus took place by, you know, Joseph and Nicodemus, and the disciples were nowhere to be found. And that wasn't something that Jesus held over their heads. I mean, he didn't. When he came back, he was still about relationships, and he was still trying to teach them about relationships. And it's interesting because when he came back, he didn't come back with this is going to sound ridiculous, but he didn't do the I told you so. Like, come, you know, like, are you going to listen to me now? Now do you get what this whole thing was about? I kept telling you guys and you weren't listening to me now. Now I'm here. I'm raised from the dead. Now do you all get it? Like he didn't come back and do that. And you know, I know so many like people that I've been to church with, and like even my mom would do the I told you so. Like, now do you finally see it? And Jesus didn't do that. He went back to fishing with them, cooking with them, walking with them, talking with them, building relationships back with them, and trying to, at the time he had with them, trying to raise them to be leaders and to build his church and redeem them from any shame or humiliation that they might have had for the way they behaved during that time, so that they could move forward and be great leaders. And that's what you do with people, is that you just you build them up and you love them. And this is what he was always about. And I love that about John, because John kind of does the after story. And I think that's great, because it reminds us that even when, you know, like the end of our story comes up and we can do the I told you so, you don't do an I told you so. you just kind of put your arm around somebody and you just keep moving with them forward, because they don't really need, and I told you so, what they kind of need is just to be hugged and loved. And I love that's what Jesus did. He just kept on fishing with them and walking with them and eating with them and having fun with them and building them up and making them great leaders.
Yeah. There's a symbolic element, of course, to them fishing on the wrong side, but I like the fact that that's the way he revealed himself to the other apostles, was like just some guy from the shore who they didn't even recognize.
Yeah.
And he's just like, try the other side, you know? And they're like, what? Close? Okay, whatever, you know? And I get the symbolism that they're supposed to be fishing for the Gentiles as opposed to sticking close to shore. Like I got, that's not lost on me.
Yeah.
But yes, the humor is, like you said, like, and again, that's a funny moment of levity again that he's sharing with them. Yeah, that doesn't put him above it all. Well, Patty, as always, a pleasure to for you to be here. If you weren't here, obviously these would be much more boring monologues, and so I always appreciate sharing with you. If you are listening and gained more people as we went long, and I appreciate that. Everybody who stuck around to keep listening to us talk about this. This one got really good. As we shouldn't be surprised. This was a gospel book after all.
Can't go wrong with Jesus.
Can't go wrong with Jesus, right? So we'll be back to the New Testament in 2 weeks. Next week, we're actually going to be talking about shame and guilt and its role in the in a Christian church that one should be interesting because we do not have nearly a consensus on that within our group. I feel strongly about it in one way, but what makes
I have stayed out of that discussion.
What makes the Love First Christians so great is that we have a lot of different people that kind of come to a lot of, I'll say, melting pot conclusions, but we still retain our own, maybe more like a beef stew. You can still, we still got some distinct conclusions here. So I think that one will be fascinating. If you're just like, oh, I don't want to see people sit around agreeing with each other all the time, then tune in next week. The week after that, we'll have to choose, jump back to the Old Testament again, study something from there. If you are listening, you want to be a part of any of those conversations or these dialogues that happen in between the weeks when you see us, the link is in the description for you to join us. Again, I appreciate everybody who has been watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, X.
X.
If you have been tuning along, I see your numbers. It really means a lot to me that you'd spend a Wednesday with us. If you'd like to spend in between the Wednesdays with us, we'd appreciate that too. Again, link is in description. It's always open. We'd love to have you, regardless of your political beliefs, your faith, your walk, whatever it is. If you're truly not a fit, then we'll say goodbye and it'll be sad, but that hasn't happened yet. So thanks so much again, Patty. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.